Supernatural experiences can happen anywhere, at any time. I think that's part of what makes them so unnerving. Tonight I will be telling 7 stories from a range of different topics. From a ghost on the side of a road, to a witch who offers 1 wish each to a couple of her visitors. These stories are not for the faint of heart. A huge thank you to the writers who allowed me to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, likes and comments are always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Growing up, my entire family was terrified of the swamp on our farm. Now I know why. My older sister and my father hated that marshy area. They said the croaking of the frogs and the rustling of the reeds made them feel uneasy. I was not allowed to go near it. Our farm was in southeast Massachusetts and encompassed a small part of the infamous Hockomock Swamp. Personally, I don't understand how such a beautiful, tranquil place could be considered an eerie, paranormal hotspot. My big sister told me that our mother had wandered into the swamp when she was a child and gotten lost. She was found after several days, traumatized and shell-shocked. She refused to tell anyone what had happened. My sister was the only source of information about my mother. She disappeared shortly after I was born. My father refused to talk about her. She was described as having light blonde hair and ocean blue eyes, just like me. My father's eyes were also blue, but he was bald and clean-shaven. The death of my mother greatly affected my father. He was sometimes cold and distant, but ultimately, he was a loving and caring single father. I think he did a good job raising his children. During my teenage years, I began to take nightly walks from the farm with our pet Great Dane Maxwell. Maxwell was enormous, black as night, and fiercely loyal and affectionate. He was my best friend and I trusted him with my life. On the night that I'm about to tell you about, I was just a 16-year-old, going out for a nighttime stroll with his dog. There was a cold autumn breeze in the air, so I wore my bomber jacket over my baggy tracksuit top. It was very bright. The moon shone through the clear night sky, illuminating the terrain around me. Still, I brought my torch with me, just in case. Maxwell and I trekked away from the house, through the fields that our cattle grazed on, down the path to the edge of the swamp's lake. Yes, my father had forbidden me from going so close to the swamp, but at the time, I didn't know what he was so scared of. Alligators? Just like on any other night, I gazed into the ankle-deep, murky water. Surprisingly, I heard no croaks from the frogs. Despite the breeze, the reeds did not rustle. It was silent, unnaturally silent. Maxwell's hackles rose. He began to growl. I pulled out my torch and shone it onto the water. I could see nothing out of the ordinary. This was perplexing. Was there an animal in the swamp that I couldn't see? I heard a faint buzzing sound, like that of a mosquito, except this one began to grow louder and louder and louder. A chill ran up my spine. A pair of glowing, luminous eyes appeared, floating just above the surface of the water. Maxwell barked. The eyes responded by rising up the torch and moonlight combined, revealing a small mouth with multiple rows of teeth and a filthy, yellow tongue hanging out. Swamp water dribbled out of its mouth. The eyes continued to rise up into the air, as more and more of its body dexterously emerged from the swamp. The abomination drew itself up to its full height. It was easily 9 feet tall, vaguely humanoid in shape, and had a body composed of pine needles, and tendrils that stretched and squirmed like worms. It awkwardly lumbered towards us. Like any sensible person, I turned and bolted, screaming for help. Maxwell, however, remained behind, facing the creature defiantly. I glanced back and saw my best friend digging his jaws into the creature's left arm. Ear-splitting howls and groans pierced the air. I'm ashamed to say it, but I abandoned my dog and ran like a coward back to the house, stumbling blindly over stones and other obstacles. At last I reached home. I dashed through the front door, slamming it behind me. My sister and father were relaxing in the living room, watching TV. My father saw the look on my face. He glanced down, trying to find Maxwell. A look of understanding passed through his face. Wordlessly, he switched off the TV, fetched his shotgun, threw on a winter coat, and picked up a lantern. He called for Bella, our beautiful German shepherd, and went out, telling us not to make a sound. My sister and I cuddled up, quivering and shivering with fear, not daring to make a sound. In the distance, I could hear more howling and groaning, along with the bang of gunshots. My father returned just after sunrise the next morning. He had no ammunition left. Bella was by his side. In his free hand, he carried Maxwell's tattered orange collar. After I told my story, we all agreed that I would stop my nightly walks, and that we would give the swamp an even wider berth than before. My father dismissed all my questions, saying they were unimportant. In the end, we buried Maxwell's collar in the garden. I never saw the creature from the swamp again. My father became even more withdrawn after the incident. He would spend long hours in his room muttering to himself. He never fully recovered and committed suicide 31 years later. To respect our privacy, I haven't included any of our names. Though my father passed a year ago, I have not forgotten his and Maxwell's bravery. These days I stay in the city. I am a 48-year-old New Yorker with a family of my own. I frequently wake up in cold sweats. My dreams are filled with horrific abominations and nightmarish swamps. What scares me most is, before my father killed himself, he wrote a note. It was short, saying only, "It's come back. It's searching for me." Many people think he had gone mad. I know the truth. It's been 5 years since this happened, but my therapist says it's good to talk about it, and I feel the nightmares go away when I do, so here we go. It all started like a normal weekend. My wife and I didn't have the kids. Our good friends of ours, Bill and Teresa, brought up the idea that we should go canoeing. It had been a while since we had been, plus it sounded nice to have a few beers on the water while catching up with our good friends. Coolers loaded down, canoes in the back. We had Bill's truck stationed at the pickup point while we drove back up to the drop-off point. The journey was around 5 hours long. When we were younger, we would always canoe down this way. I knew the turns like the back of my hand. Says it's going to rain here in a few. Scattered thunderstorms. Bill spoke up. I shrugged my shoulders. It should be okay. The creek is down anyways. Why don't we go up farther, to the other drop-off 2 miles up? I didn't like the fact of being on the water longer than we intended. That means we would be cutting it close to being at the pickup point, very close to dark. Out of the couples, I was the strongest swimmer by far. Being MCWIS certified, I was more than capable to handle whatever came our way in terms of water, but I wasn't worried about that. I was worried that being on the water, especially at night, could be dangerous. A fallen tree in the water could pose a very serious threat, especially in a tip-over. Add alcohol as a factor, and you've got a recipe for disaster. I don't really think we should. Ah, come on, it won't be that bad. We could always walk the boats to the nearest road, Bill argued. It's about a mile to the nearest road once we're down a ways. Do you think you'd want to do that hammered? If not, we can always just come back for them later. Against better judgment, I agreed. We got to the drop-off point that was near an old abandoned airfield. The bridge going across was shut down due to the stability of the bridge being too dangerous for cars to pass over any longer. Bill helped load the canoes into the water, while my wife, Paige, and Teresa were spraying suntan lotion on and laughing of stories of our children. I went back to the truck to grab the oars. That's when Bill put a hand on my shoulder. Hey man, don't worry about carrying. We're gonna be drinking, and I don't want a sheriff to pick us up and you get into some trouble. How do you know I was carrying? I know you always do. Plus Teresa gets a bit freaked out over that kind of stuff. You mind? I took my handgun out and placed it under the seat. Smirked at Bill. Ready? Thanks, buddy. He smiled and helped me carry the cooler along with the oars down the water's edge. It was a bright sunny day. It was perfect. I pushed the boat into the water and handed the oar to Paige, and we were off. What time should we be there? Paige spoke up. All goes well, we should be docking just before dark, so roughly 8:30. She smiled, opened the cooler and tossed me a cold beer. 2:30 p.m. We had been floating down the creek for a decent amount of time. We had found some rope swings along the way, and decided to stop and jump into the water. Bill and I decided to try out the rope first, just in case it was dry rotted. All seemed well, so Paige and Teresa took turns swinging and swimming in the water. Teresa let out a blood-curdling scream. There's a fucking dead animal in here. Sure enough, it was a carcass of a deer. It looked like it had been dead for some time. The body bloated, waterlogged, and foul-smelling. Teresa and Paige got back to the boats and refused to leave them for the remainder of the trip for fear of contracting something from the creek water. "That's kind of weird, don't you think?" Bill asked. The body had no gunshot or puncture wounds, so poaching was a rule out, but the legs were broken, snapped clean in two at the joints. "Looks like it fell, broke its legs, and drowned out here. Could have been from the bridge, maybe. Giving my best opinion. No matter, let's go." 5:30 p.m. We were a little more than halfway when we decided to stop again to take a break and stretch out our legs. The sun had disappeared, and storm clouds took place of the once clear blue sky. We would have been almost to the boat ramp, had we stuck to the original plan. Thunderclaps silenced the birds. The wind picked up. What started to worry me now was too much rain would raise the water level and make the conditions of getting back to the pickup point dangerous, especially because I knew that Bill had carried a city girl who wasn't much of a strong swimmer. I trusted my wife, but I wasn't in a situation to put her in harm's way if I didn't have to. I turned towards Bill. "Maybe we should wait this out." "Nonsense, man. Just a bit of wind and water won't harm anyone," he argued. "Too much wind and rain could potentially send a tree right down on your head, man. I don't want to risk putting ourselves at risk. If you want to go, maybe we should just walk." Bill wasn't having any of my suggestions. "I'm not doing that. Me and Tess are gonna just head on that way then. We will see you guys at the pickup point." I wasn't going to argue with a grown man. I'm not his father. I told him what my concerns were and insisted that he stayed. Ultimately his choice to put him and his wife in harm's way. We watched them as they floated down the water. Teresa waved at us. "Be safe, guys," Paige hollered out. 6:59 p.m. We waited out the storm in the hour that we had left and decided to float down a bit more to a place we could drag the boat up to a point in the nearby field and pick it up by truck. The water was getting significantly higher with each passing moment. "Babe," I spoke up, "could you check the weather? I just want to know if we are going to be getting hit with anything else." Paige pulled up her weather app. "Says it's going to be clear for the rest of the night." "Good. Anyway, can you call Tess and ask her where they are? See if they made much progress?" "It's going to her voicemail." "Try Bill?" "Bill too." Fuck. I muttered under my breath. Not having a cell phone is one of the worst things in a situation like this. If someone gets hurt or needs help, there's no way to get a hold of anyone unless you walk a few miles in either direction. Where we were at the moment was in the middle of nowhere. Not a road for miles, unless we went directly to the pickup point. I could make out something in the distance upstream. A piece of shiny metal sticking up out of the water near some driftwood. As soon as we get into view, my heart dropped. I could make out the OH numbers on the side. It was Bill's boat. We docked quickly on the side of the creek as I rushed up to the boat to check it out and see if they were inside. The boat was abandoned. No paddles, cooler, nothing. Paige was frantically trying to call either of the two to see if we could get a hold of them, but to no avail. It was hopeless. "I'm going to call the sheriff," Paige spoke. I screamed Bill's name, then Teresa's. Nothing but the water rushing against the boat and over the slimy rocks responded. My voice was going hoarse as I kept screaming, but nothing was working. "What are we doing, babe?" Paige asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "We're going to follow the creek and see if they didn't just walk themselves down the creek to the river." I looked around for footprints. Anything to show that maybe someone had left on foot. Then I found it. 2 sets of footprints. "Babe, I got something," I spoke up. We followed 2 sets of prints along the muddy creek bank until they came to a halt. The footprints then became sporadic, and the brush was laid down as if there was a struggle. A set of footprints led away, but a path was formed through the tall weeds, leading in the opposite direction. "Stay close," I spoke softly to Paige. We followed the path through the weeds. The sunlight was fading fast. We didn't have much time before we were forced to head out to the field and walk to where the sheriffs were called to. A search party was already on the way, so I'm sure they could have better luck finding them than Paige and I ever could. The matted down weeds full of mud finally ceased at a drop-off into a runoff ditch from one of the fields. I could make out something in the dusk. Something laying in the water right before the ditch bended into the creek. White swim shorts. It was Bill. Holy fuck, there he is. I slid down the ditch embankment and started running through the water towards him. My mind couldn't process what happened next. Something drug him over the side, into the dark water. I stopped, froze, and my skin crawled. I muttered to myself. The darkness was setting fast. I could only make out the shining of water when something black crawled out of the water and made a squishing noise as it crawled up into the muck. I at first thought it was Bill, until it stood up. It was taller than Bill, or any human. It had a humanoid figure to it, but it looked unnatural. A guttural growl emitted from it as it made a step in my direction. I turned around and ran. I ran as fast as I could towards my wife and screamed for her to run to the field and don't look back. Paige screamed as she did exactly as I said. I could hear the water being disturbed behind me as I ran. Whatever it was closing fast. I crawled my way up the embankment, slipping at a point, but successfully managed to get up on my feet and run after my wife, who was already in the clearing of the field. I managed to catch up. Looking behind me, I didn't see that I was followed. What was that? Paige asked, frantically crying. Shh, stay quiet, get down. I pulled her into the rows of corn. Paige asked me again, this time at a whisper. I don't know, just be quiet and let's walk. 10:42 p.m. We had walked for quite some time. I could see the searchlights up ahead, little orbs of light bouncing around, radio chatter in the distance. We had almost made it. We're almost there, babe. Come on. I grabbed her hand and tugged. Squish. The sound came from the left of us. The same sound I heard from earlier back where we found Bill. Run now. I shouted as we sprinted towards the lights ahead. It was trailing us, and it was gaining fast. The adrenaline cocktail flowed through my veins. I couldn't have whatever this was take Paige. I stopped and turned around. The only thing I found was a stick that was nearby. I stepped on it and made a sharp point. Immediately I was knocked to the ground, my makeshift weapon knocked away. It was on top of me, its sunken-in eyes, black, slimy, muddy flesh on mine. Its breath the most putrid smell I've ever smelled before. It opened its mouth as black bile dripped on my face. I screamed, I kicked, but nothing was of use. Its weight was far greater than mine. This is it, I thought to myself. The creature shrieked a deafening cry as it rolled over on its side, stick protruding out of its other side, Paige standing above me. Let's go, she shouted. I quickly got to my feet. We got closer to the flashlights, yelling, waving our hands, anything we could do to get the attention. I took one look behind me and could see the monster was gone. 100 yards and closing in on the search party. We finally got their attention. Flashlights all on us. Sheriffs, emergency personnel swarmed us. Paige said that some crazed killer was following us, that it had killed our friends and was trying to kill us. Sheriffs bolted in the direction she pointed. Hours of searching, they didn't find any sign of the killer or our friends. The next day they drugged the river, trying to recover the bodies of our friends. Nothing seemed to turn up. The only thing they recovered was the boat, the cooler, and the oars. My wife and I were questioned, but ultimately the case ran cold, and they couldn't find any evidence of a killer, so they decided that Bill and Tess were too drunk, and ended up flipping the boat and drowning in the water. We ended up adopting their 2 children, and simply tell them that it was an accident on the creek. I stopped by the drop-off point just the other day, and walked across the old bridge, I guess to come to terms with what had happened. I overlooked the creek. I thought about what could have been different. I had remorse for my friends. Laughing in the distance broke me from my trance. Upstream I saw 3 kayaks coming towards me. As they passed, they held up their beer in unison as a toast. I waved and watched them pass. Something out of my peripheral caught my eye. In the underbrush, I saw something writhing around in the mud, then slink into the tall weeds. My name is Philippa Montgomery, and everything has gone wrong over the past few days. I wish I could be more subtle, but I just want to get this out there. No matter how cliche this is, it's a genuine concern that runs through my mind at times like these. I don't want to die alone. This is probably a heavy bomb to drop on a few strangers, so I'm gonna break this into pieces. My name is Felipa. I'm 17. I live in a small neighborhood in Ohio. My mom, my dad, and I moved here a few years ago. It was nice up until this point. I loved it here. In this quaint house of ours, there's a wine cellar in place of a basement. The room down there is a fair size, not too cramped and not too open. It was the perfect spot to put our little knickknacks, pictures, old clothes, and of course wine. Until the noises started. The room is the farthest from the cellar entrance, and I could hear the noise loud and clear. Tapping. The weird, irregular tapping. There were no patterns to it. No, at first it started slow. Angry tapping. Like someone was drumming their fingers rapidly on the wine cellar ceiling. The tapping started a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago. I can't remember anymore. I tried to ask my parents what was going on. At first they said it was some water from the bathroom pipes leaking out into the cellar, and I wanted to believe them. But something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. I ignored it for as long as I could. A few months more of tapping, then something new. Footsteps and heavy breathing. Heavy breathing like it was in my ear. But when I sat up in bed, I would always feel the noise coming from below me, from the wine cellar. I hated this as I could never sleep. Right as I started my drift into dreamless sleep, the footsteps would get heavier. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It was almost inhumanly loud. The first week I asked my dad if he was down there at night, hoping he was working on something. His immediate response was, "No, sweetheart. Why?" I told him not to mind it. My parents were always the sweet type. I could always tell that they loved me, and I didn't want to bother them. But then they just started ignoring me. At first it started with the questions. I would ask my mom about the footsteps every so often, joking about her getting midnight wine drinks instead of midnight snacks. She would just ignore that and carry on to whatever she was doing. It was odd, but I thought they just didn't have an answer and were tired of me asking them questions. So I dropped the questions for a while. The noises ate me up inside. I barely slept and I was too scared, or too smart to go into the cellar alone. I felt like my eardrums were going to burst. I wish I went deaf. My parents stopped calling me for dinner. They stopped waking me up. They stopped talking to me. They even stopped looking at me. I didn't understand. I watched them go about their lives. My dad working from home and my mom going out to trim the trees and bushes once every week. I'm starting to question if they're even my parents anymore. They're getting more and more unresponsive. Sometimes I see mom stare off into the distance for hours on end. There's nothing inside her eyes. She looks so peaceful. Something inside my brain wants me to go with her. I gave up trying to get their attention. I'd stand right in front of them, crying, screaming for them to talk to me. They'd look around and walk right past me. I'm so tired, and the noises are getting louder. 2 months ago, the banging and the yelling started. I can't tell if it's yelling or screaming. I can't decipher any words. Not any coherent ones. Over the past 4 weeks, all of the noises have combined, and I think they're getting closer. They want me to join them in the cellar. I don't want to go. I haven't left my room in 5 days. I think they're at my door now. I'm hiding under the bed. I don't want to go. I've written this over the past 3 months. Someone tell my parents I love them. The noises are getting louder. I thought I locked the door. There's someone in my room now, and I don't know what to do. My name is John Adam Kraminski. 2 weeks ago, my brother and I were driving down the highway when we came across a woman and her child asking for a ride. She said that she had driven her car off the road and that she was just trying to get home, so we decided to pick her up. But what came after still sends chills down my spine. For backstory, about a year or so ago, a woman was texting and driving when she came to the turn on the highway near our house. Obviously, she didn't see it, and she ran off the highway into the forest near the side. The impact was enough to cause a fire to the engine, and due to her being unconscious and the shitty police response time, she and her child ended up dying in the wreck. Nothing was reported on the news, seeing as it was a case-closed situation. Skip forward a week or two after the accident, and these 2 teenagers were making the turn on the highway when they reported seeing a young female jump in front of their car. They swerved trying to not hit her, and ended up totaling their pickup truck instead. When they told the police what had happened, the other cars around them said that they never saw a woman, so the police assumed they were intoxicated. Months go by, and multiple people report seeing this on the side of the highway, and some say the woman was jumping in front of their car. Some even report seeing her holding a baby. Police conducted searches and had a few sketches of the woman, and no one could find who she was. More people reported seeing her, and a few even claimed of picking her up and dropping her off at her house, about a mile or so away, but claimed that as they were starting to let her out of their car, she had vanished. So skip forward a few weeks ago, and my brother and I were driving in town to see a movie that night. We lived roughly a mile away from the highway, and it was storming that night, which meant less people would be out. So we decided we'd pass on taking the usual back roads into town. We merged onto the highway, and as we suspected, no one was there. We drove for about a mile or so before a woman and her baby jumped in front of my truck. And thank God, the rain hadn't picked up, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to brake in time to keep from hitting them. I rolled down my window, and peeked my head outside to get a better look. "Hey miss, are you okay?" I asked politely. While staring at her, I realized that her clothes had small rips in them. "I'm fine, I just need a ride." I looked down for a second and didn't realize that it was raining, so I drove my car off the road. "Would you be able to take me back to my place? I live not too far from here." Her voice was sweet, but there was something off about it. It made my hair stand on end. "Sure, hop in. I'll need your address so I can plug it into my GPS and get us there." When she approached, I realized that she seemed whiter than bone. "Let me turn up the heat for you. It must be freezing out there." She nodded her head and patted her baby on the back. I started driving, and about half a mile before our destination, my brother elbowed me and whispered something strange. "She hasn't blinked since she stepped into the car, and from the looks of it, she isn't breathing either." At first I thought he was just joking around because she was so quiet, but the more I glanced back there, the more it seemed true. When we pulled up to the house, my brother and I unlocked the door for her, and turned to tell her to be safe. But when we looked back, she had vanished. My brother then turned and saw something in front of him. He screamed, and immediately his eyes shut and he started convulsing. His breathing was shallow. In a panic, I called for medical emergencies, informing them of his symptoms. An ambulance arrived and they got his convulsions to cease, but his breathing was still irregular, and they confirmed that his heartbeat was abnormally high. They had asked what had caused it, but due to shock and panic, I told them that I didn't know. A few days later, after studying my brother and concluding that he had an anxiety attack that mimicked a seizure, the doctors finally released him from the hospital. On the way home, I asked my brother what he saw before he passed out, but he just shook his head. We sat in silence for quite some time before he finally said something. "You wouldn't believe me if I said it." I told him no matter what he tells me that I wouldn't change my position on what happened that night. He then said something that scared me, and still scares me. "I saw us on the highway, and you were lying dead on the hood of the truck. The lady that we picked up was there, bloody and smiling, as though she was the cause of it and she was proud. She walked over to me and whispered static in my ear, and then she stuck her hand through my chest. You don't understand, John. I could feel her hand gripping my heart. All of it seemed so real." He started crying and I just sat in silence for a moment. When we got home, my brother suggested that I post the story online to see if anyone knows what may have happened. We don't do drugs, and we don't drink. Both of us are very skeptical, but after that incident, I don't know what to think anymore. Him and I both agreed that we aren't going to take that highway anymore. But the other day while on the back roads, we had heard a high pitch of static for a minute, and then it stopped. As a kid, we lived in a small community, consisted of townhouses. Every other townhouse had the same floor plan, a basement, living room, and upstairs. Some consisted of 2 or 3 bedrooms. My mom is a heavily devoted Christian. Sometimes during random nights, I would wake up to her banging on our townhouse walls and doors, chanting hallelujah, because she sensed ghosts and spirits and was trying to get rid of them. My mom did this at least twice a month. One time even barging right through my doors and banging on my closet. As a kid, just seeing that terrified the crap out of me. Anyway, my cousins would come babysit us a lot. Like a lot, because my parents would always be out of town, or because they just loved us. Who knows? And by us, I mean my older sister and I. And when they did, we loved to sleep in the living room, laying blankets and pillows on the ground and spreading it over the course of the floor. Our living room wasn't the biggest in the world, but it was big enough for 5 to 8 people, sleeping vertically next to each other. It also allowed us to have more space, and it was cooler because our bedrooms couldn't fit all of us in one. One night, it was downpouring, like really bad, and we had all slept on the floor. I vividly remember waking up, and I was that kid who, if awakened, would struggle to fall back asleep. I was also a sleepwalker. Not that it's important for this story. I would also put the blanket over my body from head to toe, just to avoid the darkness around me. In the meantime, many cars were going off because of the storm, and I wasn't worried because it was a normal thing. I remember pulling the blanket down from my face to get some air, and could see that everyone had somehow moved to the end of the floor, as if they were tired of sleeping next to me. I was isolated like a stranded person on an island, with a blanket all to myself. I was confused, but nonetheless I wasn't worried, so I put the blanket back up over my head. Growing up, I really never believed in scary things that would happen to people, especially when they told their stories about experiencing such events including sleep paralysis and seeing things in the dark. I would shrug it off and be like, yeah, okay, that's creepy. And then it began. As I laid there thinking to myself how I was going to fall back asleep, I felt a tug. Not just an ordinary tug, as if my feet was just moving the blankets, but a tug as if someone was yanking the blanket off my body. A tug as if a newborn baby was trying to reveal who was under the blankets. A tug as if someone was trying to get your attention. I thought to myself at first, it's probably just me overthinking. But then as I laid flat, silent and still, it happened again and again and again, like a never-ending cycle. Each time it happened, the tug became stronger or weaker, and I knew that I was not imagining this whole situation, or that someone was awake playing with me. At one point, I started to curl into a fetal position, and move my legs away from the tug, but that didn't help. I was stranded in the middle of the living room all by myself, while everyone else was coupled together at the other end. Knowing this just made everything more uneasy. I remember I froze in fear, debating on whether or not I should gun it upstairs to sleep in my bedroom or dash quickly across to the others. For a quick fact, I always felt safe in my own bedroom, even though I slept in it all by myself, so gunning to my bedroom wasn't a bad idea if I chose that route. I was in a fight or flee situation. I could remove the covers quickly and see what it was, but that would expose my whole body and potentially make me see something I don't want to see. I thought to myself, if I don't move now, I'm going to see something. And then, in an instant, I quickly pounced out of my position and dashed to the others. I remember just saying their names loudly. Wake up, let me sleep here," as they quietly would say, "What's wrong?" I didn't have enough time to explain to them what happened, nor did I want to look at my previous location area. I quickly slid in my cousin's lap after that, and went away the night. I woke up the next morning still feeling the effects of that night, not sure if it was real or fake. Still in shock and fear, I told no one. I didn't want to tell my mom. Well, because she would go on a hallelujah cleaning throughout the townhouse, and I did not want that. It was hard for me to process and express what I experienced, and it wasn't until I got older that I started to tell people my story, and even when I tell it, I still feel the trembles of that night chilling through my body. My mom still does not know that this happened, and probably won't ever know. According to many other residents who live there, they say that the townhouses were built on Native American land. Not sure if this may be the cause of it, but who knows. I was later able to corroborate this fact, and as I got older, and during my time there, other residents also experienced supernatural and spiritual events that also shook them. One story I heard from a resident was that in the darkest hours, you could hear a woman crying and walking around the community. Never witnessed it myself, so just to say, I wasn't the only one. It's still raining. This makes the 13th day in a row that it's been raining outside of my apartment. I haven't seen another person or taken one foot outside in all that time. I was lucky that I had enough food to last me. Sorry, I just realized I haven't introduced myself. My name's Jamie Miller, and I'm a website tech, which is honestly a really easy job. All I have to do is monitor a couple of websites, and if something goes wrong then I fix it. Plus one of the highlights is that I can work from home. As I sit at my computer, I find myself just watching the rain fall. It didn't seem to be getting any heavier, but it wasn't stopping anytime soon. I've given up trying to message people. I've emailed and messaged everyone I know, and not one of them have gotten back to me. So my days have gotten repetitive. I get out of bed, have some toast and orange juice for breakfast. I then check the websites to see if anything's wrong. Later on, I have a cheese and ham sandwich, check the website again, and then have dinner, which for the past 2 weeks has been ravioli and a jacket potato. That changed a couple of hours ago when I received an email from Rainwatcher. It was a simple one-word message which read, "Hello." I rubbed my eyes in case I was seeing things, but the message was still there. I couldn't believe it. There was still someone out there. The heavy feeling of being alone started to wash away. My email to Rainwatcher was as follows. "Hello, it's nice to finally hear from someone. Do you have any idea when this rain will stop?" The reply was immediate. "I can't believe there's someone else out there. It's been weeks since I've spoken to anyone. Do you know when this rain will stop?" I got up and walked over to the window. The rain was so heavy that I couldn't see the ground below. The sky was completely void of light. I walked over to my desk and responded to the email. "Honestly, I don't know when it will stop. I tried looking out the window and it's pitch black. I can't even see the ground. Is it any clearer at your end?" It was the longest minute of my life waiting for the reply. Then the sound that was like music in my ears rang through my apartment, and I had a new email from Rainwatcher. It said, "It's all dark on my end as well. I'm just happy I have enough food to last me until this rain stops." I couldn't help feeling the same way. I miss human interactions. At this point, I would be happy if I had a cat or dog, instead of it just being me alone in this apartment. I received another email. I've checked all the other apartments and they were all empty. I'm the only one here. I can't even imagine what someone else would look like. I don't even remember what I look like. I remembered my name at least. I wondered what my email friend is called, so I decided to email them and ask. A second or so later I had a response. "Oh, did I not tell you? My name is Jamie Miller. What's yours?" I fell back off my chair and shuffled backwards before hitting my head on the wall. Maybe it was a coincidence that we had the same name. I got back to my feet and picked my chair off the floor. I went through my emails and my email address was Rainwatcher. I had been emailing myself. I don't know how much longer I can take this never-ending loneliness. I want to talk to someone, anyone. I stood by my window watching the rain fall, except it was no longer falling. It was rising. I opened my window and took a look around. The only thing I saw was the dark void covering everything except my little window, and the rain. The never-ending rain. I needed it to end. I shut the window and sat back at my desk. Since I've started writing my story, it has been a month since the rain started, and it's still raining upwards. It's now been 6 months since the rain started. I still have enough food to last me, and as I work at home, I'm still being paid, even though I can't go out and buy anything. A couple of hours ago I received an email from Rainwatcher. I'm so happy that I get to talk to someone again. In the year before Black Monday, when the stock market collapsed and just about everybody lost their jobs, including my dad, we used to live in an old stone house on Orchard Road that sat on about 70 acres of backyard. It was cheap, or so I've been told, because most of the land was unusable, and we were a good drive from the nearest town. The bus ride to school was 45 minutes, and Jack and I were at the end of the route. The property sloped down from our house across a stretch of lawn, then into a winding creek that used to sparkle in the sunlight. Across the creek was a tangle of brambles, and a forest of birch trees beyond that. Those brambles looked so thick and thorny that we had to live in the stone house a full year before me and my brother plucked up the courage to go through them, and we were just boys then. Jack was 9 and I was 7, so you understand it took an awful lot of thorns to dissuade us from a good game of pretend. One day, a day just like any other, I was fetching myself a snack from the kitchen cupboard when Jack comes stomping into the room and says to me, "Benny boy, come down to the creek. I want to show you something really cool." My name is Brendan, but Jack always calls me Benny boy for a reason only he knew. "I don't wanna," I said. "Why not? There's a snapping turtle there. Mom says it's grumpy and it'll bite off my toes." This was probably true. There was an old she snapper down there, with a shell as big as the plate we used to haul our Thanksgiving turkey from the oven to the table, and she was likely to bite off whatever part of you she could manage, if you got near her eggs. But Jack wasn't interested in the creek. "We won't go in the water," he said. "A tree blew over in the storm, and we can walk across it like a bridge." Into the brambles? To this day, I don't know where our parents were when we were hatching our scheme. Probably just in the other room, not too far, and for some reason they didn't hear us. I think maybe she had something to do with it. Maybe she had already hatched her plan by the time I put the Chips Ahoy cookie in my mouth. "I know a way through the brambles," Jack assured me. "I'll show you." There had been a vicious lightning storm the night before, and a great number of trees and power lines had been pushed down, like they were just skinny kids with glasses. And the gale force wind was the schoolyard bully. Jack was right. One of the trunks was lying across the creek, a perfect bridge. It just so happened that it had fallen in just the right spot, so that you couldn't see it from the kitchen window. All that my mom saw, if she saw anything, were her two boys walking beside the creek. "This way, don't be nervous," he said, and Jack started across the trunk with his arms stretched out like a trapeze artist. I went after him. I remember being scared that the trunk would roll and send me splashing and gulping into the creek, where Miss Snapper would surely have my toes. But the trunk didn't budge. It should have rolled. In fact, the thing was so thin, it should have broken in two when Jack stepped in the middle. But I don't need to tell you now why it held on. "This way," Jack said again once we were across. He was pretending to be Peter Pan, and I was the Lost Boys or Captain Hook or some other thing. It doesn't matter. He went down on his hands and knees and crawled backwards into the brambles. "Why are you doing that?" "You have to go backwards. Some of the thorns swing in when you go by or poke in, but if you go backwards, they just hit your butt." I giggled. "I'll hold on to your ankle," he said. "I know the way." "Okay, Jack." "Are you scared?" "No," I lied. It was not quite pitch black inside the twisting vines, but it was dark and filled with bugs, and I didn't want to get pricked or tangled up or bit. "Don't worry, Benny boy. If you want, you can close your eyes. I know the way." I know the way. I still hear him saying that sometimes. And I wondered just how he knew the way. Had the witch lured him in once before, then sent him back when he spilled the beans about the plump little brother he had at home? Or was she just speaking through him, sticking her hand in his back, and picking at his brain with long yellow fingernails, like some long-distance puppeteer? I still don't know. I don't want to. The thicket of vines and thorns was only 20 or 30 yards long, but it took us at least 15 minutes to get through. I closed my eyes like Jack said I could, and he pulled me left and right, and back towards the house, then farther away. I remember the thorns picking at my t-shirt and skin, hunting for my eyes, but save for a few scratches, I came out just fine. "You can stand up," Jack said, releasing my ankle. "Look around, this place is cool." It wasn't cool. I'd swear on a Bible that looking into the forest from the backyard, those birch trees were tall and thick, with green leaves aplenty, but once we were standing in the forest with them, the white bark just made the trees look like leg bones sticking out of the earth, picked clean by vultures. There wasn't a bit of green on any of them. Even the brambles on the side were just brown and gray. The nearest green was the backyard we had left behind. And I think that was when I realized Mom wouldn't be able to find us. If I jumped up and down screaming my head off, she might be able to hear something if the window was open, but she might just think it was a bird. I got scared then. "Let's go back." "No way, I want to explore. Look over here, it's like in the Wizard of Oz." Even at the age of 7, I thought it was weird for Jack to be into girly crap like the Wizard of Oz movie, but turning around to see where he was pointing, I felt a little better about it, because this was a far cry from the yellow brick road. A cracked wood arrow was nailed into one of the birch trees, and that arrow pointed farther into the depths of the forest. The forest floor was just dirt and more dirt, but it was a little later along the path we were meant to follow, and there were small white rocks here and there along the sides too spelled out for us. It wasn't much of a path, and if Jack hadn't seen the arrow, I don't think we would have noticed it. But he did notice it, and he wanted to go down it, and I followed my big brother loyally into danger. I can't say how long we were in those woods, because time was different here. It crumpled up like the failed spelling bee I threw in the garbage once. I felt like we had been walking a half hour at the most. We left the house around 2 in the afternoon, but before I knew it, the sun was headed down and the sky was streaked orange and red ahead of us. To our backs, the world had gone as dark as the bottom of the blue ocean. We never heard any birds flapping their wings or squirrels running through the trees, and the night crept up on us as quiet as a ghost. "Can we go back?" I said. "I'm scared." "What are you scared of, Fraidy Cat? This is an adventure. Like Bilbo and Gandalf. I'll be Gandalf and... I don't want to play pretend," I said, and I remember crying a little. "There's bones everywhere. I want to go home." The little white rocks speckled on the path weren't rocks after all. They were little skulls of birds and mice. There was a big one beside me that belonged to a fox or a cat. The drooping eye holes made it look sad, like the poor thing had died crying. Jack's eyebrows met. "Fine," he said, getting short with me. "You can go back if you're a little chicken, but I'm going ahead. It's not dark yet, and I want to see what's making the light up ahead." There was indeed a flickering yellow spot of light down the path. I guessed it might be a fire behind someone else's window. Maybe one of our neighbors. When we got to the lights and discovered the witch's hovel, it turned out I had been right. We had come to a circular stone hut with a smoking chimney. It stood blamelessly in the middle of a clearing, totally unexceptional, except for that the smoke coming from the chimney, it was alternating between lazy spirals of purple and emerald green. "Please, Jack, I want to go home." "Then go. Come with me," I begged. "It's scary." The orange light of the fire lapped merrily against the night. By now the sky was completely black, the absurd smoke blotting out the stars and the moon. "I just want to see who lives here, and then we can go," Jack said. "I want to see why she lives in the woods by herself." I didn't ask how Jack knew these things about the owner of the house, that she was alone, and that she was a she. I just wanted to go home. It was the middle of summer, and I was starting to shiver from the cold, and nothing is so disheartening as the cold. It pushed me aside. I think the witch knew just what buttons she needed to press to get my frightened ass up in her laneway, and through her front door. I followed him up the path, which was now bricked with a solid line of animal skeletons. Eyeless and tongueless squirrels, rabbits, foxes, and cats guided us up the aged front door of the hovel. Jack knocked 3 times with a pounding fist. The dull thwacks were so loud and sudden, I almost wet myself. "Hello?" Jack called. "Maybe nobody's home. There's a fire going. Somebody has to be home. But, hello?" The door glided open with an obnoxious whine. There was no one standing there to have opened it, and when I saw that door had opened itself, I nearly scarpered right then. I'm ashamed to say it, but I would have left my brother to die, and hauled my ass back into the woods, and gotten lost. I probably would have starved to death too. But Jack grabbed my shoulder, and pulled me into the hovel with him. Once we got inside, the firelight changed. Lively orange-yellow, waned into the color of worn piano keys. Then the yellow of old teeth, then white. It bounced off of mossy, wet cobblestone walls. They reminded me of Skeletor's castle, and I whimpered. But Jack did not let me go. The fireplace was in a room that we could not see, down the pale-lit hallways and around a corner. It seemed to me the moon must have fallen out of the sky, down the stranger's chimney, and into her fireplace. "Hello?" said Jack. "I heard you shouting for us to come play. I'm Jack Mayfield, and this is my little brother, Benny Boy." Jack was ahead of me, pulling me into the den by hand. He was around the corner by now. He could see someone or something that I couldn't. When it was my turn to enter the room, I caught a face full of purple and green smoke, and I breathed it all in without a moment to think about what was happening. It made the room double, then triple, and I felt my thoughts getting hazy. "Hey Jack," I said. My voice sounded like Darth Vader, like I was in slow motion. I could make out the fuzzy shape of our host across the room, but that was all. "Let's get out of here. I don't feel so good." "Nonsense," the witch said, with a voice like nails on a gravestone. "You'll come sit with me. Jack Mayfield, Benny Boy. I have waited up all night for you, and it would be terribly rude of you to leave so early." "All night?" I asked, but I was ignored. I heard Jack say yes. He was ahead of me somewhere in the fog, but the stuff was so thick in the air that I couldn't even see his outline. Rude. Don't want to be rude. The witch cackled. It sounded like glass breaking. Besides, she said, it's too dark for you to go now. You would wander and wander until the sun came up. There are dreadful monsters in these woods. You could count yourself lucky if a bear got you. Please, come have a seat. My vision was settling. The witch sat in the white dining chair made of animal bones. What might have been glue or wax was frozen in drips and globs, where it had dried, holding the smaller weak bones together. She twirled a hand with skin so pale that it was a bit green, and two plastic blue chairs appeared out of thin air, facing her. I recognized them. I sat in an identical chair from Monday to Friday in my classroom. Sit, she said, not unkindly. Jack hopped into his chair, pleased as punch, but I took a little longer to get into mine. Some part of me, the part that the purple clouds had not choked out, was screaming for me to not sit, to pull Jack and run in any direction, as long as it was not here. What's wrong, Benny boy? She asked. I don't feel so good. Have a seat, she said. You'll feel better. Your journey has been long and your faces are longer still. What could I do? I was 7 years old and had been conditioned every day of my life to obey the commands of grown-ups. I sat. I half expected the chair to turn into spiders, but it stayed a chair. I started to feel better too, and I was just about to tell her so when I got my first real look at her face. Her lips were peelings of ash and dead bark. Her skin was covered in warts, and the outline of a worm with 100 legs crawled below the skin of her face. Her eyes were black, and I could tell she was the sort of creature who knows what's really waiting in the closet, and underneath the bed when the lights go out. The worm under her face moved. It moved. I've had my share of visits to the psychologist since then, and that bug squirming around under her face is the part I still don't tell anybody about. I can barely stand to think about it. She placed her hands on her knees and leaned forward in a poor impression of a kindergarten teacher. Who likes games? She asked, bubbling with enthusiasm. I do, Jack shouted, and both of his hands shot up in the air. His chair rocked but didn't topple. I rose a hand slowly. I imagine I had a face like I was about to hurl. That's how I felt anyways. Only the clenching pain was in my head, not my belly. I know the best game, she said. It's called the crystal ball game. You have never had more fun in your lives. How do we play? Jack was rocking in his chair. His eyes bulged in excitement. The witch snapped her fingers, and a crystal ball filled the space between us. It popped into existence without a sound, out of nowhere. It was huge, as big around as a dinner table, and filled with thick pink and purple swirling clouds. She began to move her hands in swooping circles in the air above the ball, and the clouds inside of it gathered and followed her movements. The crystal ball game goes like this, she whispered. The fire was dying behind her, but the orb was giving off its own pink waving light, like the shimmering reflection of a pool of water. You may ask the ball for anything, or to know anything, and then I will ask the crystal ball if it wants to give that thing to you. It will say yes or no. If it says yes, it will also name a price, and if you drop the payment onto the ball, you will have whatever you ask for. I don't have any money, I mumbled. The witch laughed again. It will not ask you for money, don't worry. Would you like to go first, Benny boy? My name is Brendan, I said. Only Jack calls me Benny boy. I like your real name much better. It's a big boy name. Would you like to go first, Brendan? I was about to say yes, but Jack shouted beside me. I want to go first. The witch swapped her focus like a shark turning in the water at the scent of blood, and she poured out all her charm for Jack. What would you like to ask for? I thought Jack was going to ask for a robot, maybe one that he could go on adventures with, that wouldn't whine about wanting to go home early. But Jack said, I wish Mom and Dad didn't fight anymore. I remember thinking that was a weird thing to ask for. I had never seen Mom and Dad fighting. Of course, there was a lot 7-year-old me didn't notice that 9-year-old Jack had picked up on. But there was even more that we had both missed. Bruises hidden behind makeup. Nights that Dad spent working and not coming home. Mom slipping out of the house to God knows where, when everyone else was fast asleep. Let me ask the ball, the witch said. She leaned over the crystal ball until her lips were an inch away from the glass, and then she whispered so quietly that I couldn't hear what she was saying. Did it work? Jack asked. Hush, child, she snapped. A little bit of warmth had gone out of her voice. Don't spoil the game. I'm listening. The worm in her face twitched greedily. It moved from under her cheek to a spot above her ear that was covered with hair. I thought I could hear it making a clicking sound, but if it had mouth parts, I could not see them. I hear it, she said after a moment. Listen, you will too. At the start, I didn't hear anything, but when I went totally silent, going as far as to hold my breath, I did hear something. A deep old voice, like the voice of a mountain, was thrumming beneath the crystal ball. I had no idea what it was saying, but it rose and fell in what must have been words of some other language, because when it stopped, the witch was beaming. It can be done, she said. Are you ready to hear the payment? I wasn't, not anymore. The smoke in my brain had been mostly cleared out, enough that I could see we were in deep trouble. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't even shift in my chair. I'm ready, Jack said, and for the first time he sounded a little bit scared too. It will cost you one ear. And to my eternal horror, she pulled a black carving knife from behind her back. The blade was curved and at least a foot long, and the edges were worn over the rust. An ear? Said Jack. An ear. Either one. Take this knife and place your ear on the crystal. Jack made to lean forward into the ball, but the witch screeched. No, stupid boy. Cut it off. I would do it for you, but that's one of the rules of the game. You have to give the ear. Jack frowned, as if she were asking him to do nothing more than solve a difficult math problem. Will it work? But that was a stupid question. All three of us, somehow, knew it would. That was part of the game too. If the witch wanted his ear, she could have just taken it off at her leisure. She was thin, but she was much taller than Jack, and she had held the knife. No, she wanted for some reason to please whatever lived inside of that crystal, whatever was making those pink clouds and speaking in a language I had never heard before or since. The thing in the crystal wanted Jack's ear, and was willing to perform what magic it had to get the flesh. It will work, she said. Forever? Forever. There will be no more fighting. There might be disagreements over what to have for dinner or what movies to watch, but the fighting will cease. Then he asked, Do you have a band-aid? She waved her hand. A blue box appeared there with band-aid printed on the front in bold red letters. It shone like the paint was still wet, like the box was bleeding. Don't do it, Jack, I mumbled. Without looking at me, the witch snapped her fingers, and my teeth mashed together so hard it gave me a headache. When I next tried to speak, I found that I couldn't open my mouth. There was cement holding my jaw together. Jack made the cut. There was no magic in the blade to make the job quicker or slower, and there was no magic in the smoke wafting in the room to dull the pain. He screamed, and I think he would have given up, but maybe the demon behind the pink clouds was forcing him onwards, or maybe he had seen a fight between Mom and Dad that was bad enough to keep him cutting. He held it out in his right hand, while his left clamped over the gaping wound on his head. The ear was almost unrecognizable. Jack was no surgeon, and the cut was uneven. The pathetic flap was drowning in a pool of his blood. Let me bandage him, I said, and the witch handed me the box. I opened it, expecting snakes or centipedes to leap out and bite me, but there were only band-aids. I applied one to Jack, and it soaked at once, rendered completely useless. Eventually I had stuck every single bandage to him. The blood was still trickling down, but he wasn't going to bleed out. The ear, Jack, the witch whispered, and now all of the motherly layers she had applied to her voice were stripped away. Place it on the ball. Do not let your fingers touch the glass. When the ear touched the ball, the pink cloud sped up, circling the orb faster and faster, like they were in a blender. And soon it was happening so fast that there was no telling one cloud from the other. The crystal ball was a solid pink, like the witch had popped the top off and filled it with Pepto-Bismol. The crystal began to bubble around the ear, the glass itself rising and falling, as if it were made of nothing but boiling water, and then instead of bursting and settling back into the sphere, one of the bubbles just kept growing. It lengthened into a glass tentacle, and flopped itself over my brother's ear. Then another branch fell onto the ear, and another. Then they sank down. Jack's ear was being pulled into the glass, to be eaten by whatever lived in there. After a few seconds, the ear was gone, and the crystal ball was the same smooth orb it had been before. The spiraling cloud slowed, then stopped. It is done. The witch breathed. Jack was whimpering. But when the witch turned to me, the world around us seemed to disappear. Brendan? She said. You're next. What is it that you want, more than anything? And I told her, I want to go home. When we appeared in front of my parents, just popped into their living room out of thin air, blood seeping from my brother's head, the light was pouring in through the front window. We had been gone for less than 2 hours, and the sun was just starting to tip towards the horizon. Jack never told anyone what really happened to him that day. He told my parents, then the doctor, then everyone he ever met, that his ear got snagged by the thorns. I think as the years passed by, he started to believe that's what really happened. My parents stopped fighting too, for what it's worth. They're still together, 90 years old, and the happiest couple I know. In my secret heart, I think the price paid was worth it. Therapy has helped me. It feels good to talk about what happened to Jack and I, even if I have to start every session with, I know this didn't really happen, and end with things like, I know it didn't happen. The sessions always end with a therapist asking what I gave up in the dream in exchange for a safe trip home. And I have to look them dead in the face and tell them, because there's no use lying about a story that didn't happen. They know what I'm going to tell them. The answer is obvious, but they ask anyways. If I want to keep on going, I have to tell myself sometimes that Jack's ear really did get pulled off in those brambles. I know it's not true, and that somewhere in the birch forest, there is a witch and a crystal ball, waiting like for Hansel and Gretel, or Jack and Brendan to come wandering by. But I know I will never see her again. I think Jack got off easy, because he's still got to keep one ear. He can hear you just fine, as long as he's tilting his head at you when you talk. I got it worse. The crystal ball wanted both of my eyes.